A regional restaurant chain called my cell phone on a Wednesday afternoon to ask, very politely, when they could start using my mother's name on their new menu. They were rolling out an authentic family recipes line, the woman explained, and they were so excited about the Marta's brand, and they just needed to coordinate the timing of the recipe handoff. I was standing at my prep counter with a knife in my hand and 100 onions to get. Hi, I'm Ethan Cole, and this is Ethan After Dark, where I tell stories of betrayal, family secrets, revenge, and sweet justice. Now back to the story, through before the dinner rush, and I said, I'm sorry, who told you that you could use that name? There was a confused little laugh on the line. Your brother did, she said. Vince. He's the owner. Aren't you the cook? Aren't you the cook? Yes, I am the cook. I have been the cook at Marta's for 16 years. Since the morning after my father's funeral, when I opened the doors because that is what he would have wanted, and because 2 waitresses and a dishwasher needed their jobs. And that was the moment, with a knife in my hand and 100 onions in front of me, that I understood my brother had sold the restaurant out from under all of us. He had sold my father's diner, my mother's name, and every recipe in that kitchen. He just had not bothered to check who those things actually belonged to. Let me back up, because you need to know this family and this building to understand what happened next. Marta's is named for my mother. My father opened it in 1983, a narrow 12-table diner on the corner of 3rd and Vine, and he named it after the woman he loved because he said a man should put his wife's name on the thing he was proudest of besides his kids. My mother ran the front. My father ran the kitchen. And the food was nothing fancy, just the food of people who came from somewhere and remembered it. Sunday gravy that took 6 hours. Bread that my father mixed by hand at 4 in the morning. A meatball recipe that my grandmother carried in her head across an ocean and my father wrote down, finally, on the back of an order pad, the only copy in the world. I grew up under those 12 tables. I did my homework in the back booth. I learned to fold napkins before I learned to ride a bike. And somewhere in there, without anyone deciding it out loud, it became understood that I was the one who would keep the place going. Not because I was told to, because I loved it the way you love a person, with your hands and your early mornings and not with speeches. My brother Vince is 4 years older than me and he was never a diner man. I say that without judgment, or I try to. Vince was the one who was going to make something of himself, the one who went to business school, who wore the good shoes, who talked about margins and scale and the brand back when the rest of us just called it the food. He worked in the restaurant exactly 1 summer at 17 and hated every minute of the grease and the heat and the 6 a.m. bread, and my father, to his credit, let him go and never made him feel small about it. Not everybody's built for the line, Dad said. Vince'll find his thing. Vince found his thing. His thing was other people's money. He would come back twice a year in the good shoes and sit in the back booth and tell my father how the place was leaving money on the table, how they should franchise, how the brand had legs. My father would nod and pour him a coffee and then go make bread at 4 in the morning like he had every day of his life. And I want to be fair to Vince here, because bitterness is easy and my father raised me better than easy. Vince genuinely believed he was the smart one, the one who could see the big picture while the rest of us had our heads down in the onions. That belief is the whole story. It is the exact place where a smart man walks off a cliff, sure the whole way down that everyone else just can't see the view. When my father had his stroke 11 years ago, the family did the thing families do, which is that the one who was already there did the caring and the one who was already gone stayed gone. I closed the diner for 2 weeks and I sat with my father in the hospital and then in the rehab place, and I fed him when his right hand wouldn't work, and I read him the specials board so he'd know the kitchen was still running. Vince flew in for a long weekend, told me to let him know if I needed anything, and flew back out. He was busy. He was always busy. That is not a crime. But I want you to hold on to it, because later my brother would build his whole idea of himself on being the one who saved the family business. And it is worth remembering exactly who was in the room at 4 in the morning. Here is the part Vince never knew, because knowing it would have required sitting still. In those weeks after the stroke, when my father could talk again but got tired fast, he asked me one afternoon to bring him the diner box. It was an old fishing tackle box where he kept the important papers. And he had me drive him, in a wheelchair, to a small law office 2 blocks from the restaurant, run by a lawyer named Sal who had eaten lunch at Marta's every Tuesday for 20 years. My father was not a sophisticated man about money. He would tell you that himself. But he was not a fool about people, and he had spent 30 years watching his 2 sons, and he knew exactly what each of them was. So that afternoon in Sal's office, with me pushing the wheelchair and not fully understanding what I was witnessing, my father did 3 quiet things. He registered Marta's as a trademark, the actual name and the logo my mother had drawn on a napkin in 1983. He had never bothered before. You don't when you're just a corner diner. But Sal had been after him for years, and now, facing his own mortality, he did it. Second, he took that order pad with my grandmother's meatball recipe, and the whole binder of recipes I had helped him write down over the years, and he registered them, the collection, as a copyrighted work, the Marta's Family Recipe Collection, with Sal walking him through the forms. And third, and this is the part that mattered most, he put the trademark and the recipe copyright into my name. Not the business. The soul of the business. The name and the food. I remember asking him why in the car afterward because it felt strange and formal and unlike him. And my father, tired, his right hand still curled in his lap, looked out the window and said, "Because the building is just a building, Danny. Anybody can buy a building. But the name and the food, that's your mother and your grandmother and me. That goes to the one who cooks. You keep the fire. Not the one who wants to sell the fireplace." I didn't fully understand it then. I filed the papers in the tackle box and I got back to the onions because there was a dinner rush. There is always a dinner rush, and I forgot about it for 11 years. My father recovered enough to potter around the kitchen for a few more years, but the running of the place passed to me, fully, and I ran it. I want you to know it was not easy. A 12-table diner is not a gold mine. It is a way of life that happens to pay the bills if you never sleep. There were lean years. There was the year the road got torn up for construction and we nearly went under. But I kept every one of my father's people employed, and I kept the bread at 4 a.m., and I kept my grandmother's meatballs exactly the way they were meant to be, and the regulars kept coming because a place like that is not really selling food. It is selling the feeling of being somewhere that remembers you. My father died 6 years ago. My mother, the actual Marta, had passed 2 years before him. And the ownership of the business, the corporation that held the lease and the equipment and the day-to-day, that got left to both of us, to Vince and me 50-50, which seemed fair and simple and like my father, who loved us equally even when we did not earn it equally. On paper, Vince owned half a diner he had never worked a shift in. In reality, he was a name on a document who cashed a small distribution check twice a year and told people at parties that his family was in the restaurant business. I thought that was the end of the story. It was not. It was the setup. What I did not know until that phone call with the onions was that a regional chain had been quietly buying up local institutions, the beloved corner places, and reopening them as a nostalgia brand, same name, same family recipes, corporate everything underneath. And they had approached Vince. Not me. Vince. Because Vince was listed as an officer of the corporation, and Vince took the good shoes to a nice lunch and presented himself as the owner and decision-maker, and Vince had, over the course of 2 months I knew nothing about, negotiated a sale. He sold them the corporation, the lease on the building, the equipment, the location, the operating business, for a number that, split 50-50, would have been the most money either of us had ever seen at once. And he sold it, in the contract, including all intellectual property, trade names, trademarks, and proprietary recipes associated with the Marta's brand. He signed that. He represented that he had the authority to convey all of it. And he did not tell me, his 50% partner and the person who actually ran the place, because he assumed, the way he had assumed his whole life, that I was just the cook, that the smart one gets to decide, that the onions don't get a vote. He forgot to check the tackle box. He never even knew there was anything to check. I did not call my brother. I want to be clear about that because I wanted to drive to his house and put his good shoes through a window. When I am hurt, though, something in me goes cold and slow and careful, the way my father got careful in that lawyer's office. Loud was never going to win against Vince. Vince was a genius at loud, at the confident laugh, at making you the unreasonable one. So instead of calling him, I went home and I climbed into the attic and I found the tackle box, and I sat on the attic floor with a flashlight and I read papers I had filed and forgotten 11 years before. There it was. The trademark registration for Marta's, registered, in my name, dated 11 years earlier. The copyright registration for the Marta's family recipe collection, in my name, same date. My grandmother's meatballs, my father's Sunday gravy, the bread mine. Not the corporation's, not Vince's. Mine because my father, tired and half-paralyzed and wiser than all of us, had walked into a law office and separated the fireplace from the fire. The chain had bought a building, a lease, and a pile of stainless steel equipment. They had paid a nostalgia price for a nostalgia brand. And the brand, the name on the sign and the recipes that made the name mean anything, they had bought from a man who did not own them and had no power to sell them. I found Sal's old firm. Sal had retired, but a younger attorney there named Priya pulled my father's file. The original file, still in their records, careful people keeping careful records. She laid my registrations next to a copy of the sale contract that the chain's lawyers had, in their eagerness, already sent over expecting a smooth handoff, and she read both twice, and then she set them down and looked at me and said the most satisfying sentence I have heard in years. So your brother sold them a car, she said, and promised to include an engine that belongs to you. And nobody in that room thought to check the title on the engine. I said that was exactly right. She almost smiled. Careful of your father, she said. He did this for precisely this day. He must have known one of you would try to sell the soul of the place. He must have known. I have thought about that 100 times since. My father, who could barely sign his own name with his good hand gone, saw all of this coming 11 years out, clearly enough to build a small quiet wall around a napkin logo and a grandmother's meatballs. Careful men see around corners. It is the closest thing to sorcery I have ever watched a human being perform. Priya did not sue anyone, not at first. She sent one letter to the chain's legal department with copies to my brother. It was calm and it was polite and it was, for that reason, devastating. It informed them that the trademark Marta's and the entire recipe collection were the registered property of me, personally, and had been for over a decade, and that neither the corporation nor any officer of it had ever held any right to convey them. It attached the registrations. It noted, without heat, that any use of the Marta's name or the recipes by the chain would be infringement, and that any representation in their purchase agreement that these assets were included had been made without authority. Translation. They had paid full price for a diner and could not legally call it Marta's or serve a single one of its dishes. The thing they were actually buying, the only thing that made a corner diner worth the chain's money, they had not bought at all. Vince called me 11 times that day. I know because I counted the way you count things in the strange arithmetic of family betrayal. I did not answer because Priya told me not to and because I finally understood that a phone call was the one arena where my brother could still win. On the phone he could cry and reframe and make me the ungrateful little brother who was blowing up a life-changing deal out of spite. On paper he had nothing. Let him sit with the paper, Priya said. Paper doesn't blink. His messages went through the stages. First the warm, wounded one. How could I do this to family? We could both be rich. Why was I always so difficult? Then the angry one. Calling me jealous, calling me small, saying Dad always babied me. And then, late that night, a different one. Quiet. Almost the brother from before the good shoes. I didn't know, he said. Danny, I swear I didn't know Dad did that. Please just call me back. And I believed that part, actually. He didn't know. That was the whole point. He had spent his life too important to sit still long enough to learn the things that mattered. And my father had planned his estate around exactly that ignorance. The deal collapsed, of course. You cannot sell a nostalgia brand you are legally barred from naming. The chain walked, and they were not gentle with Vince about the representations he had signed. He was exposed on that badly, and for a few weeks I think my brother had a real look at a cliff of his own. I could have let him fall. I want to be honest that I considered it. But my father did not build that quiet wall so his sons could destroy each other over the top of it. He built it so the fire would go to the one who kept it, and it had. I had won the moment I climbed down from that attic. The rest was just deciding what kind of man I wanted to be at the finish. So I met Vince at the back booth, the one where I did my homework as a kid, and I put a single sheet of paper in front of him. Not a lawsuit, a buyout. I would purchase his 50% of the corporation, the building lease, and the equipment at a fair and honest number, funded over time out of the diner's own earnings. He would sign over his half. And in exchange I would not pursue him for what he had signed and represented without authority, and the family would never have to hear the whole ugly shape of it. He would keep his name. I would keep the fire, all of it, finally and completely the way my father wanted. He read it for a long time, and for once in his life my brother did not perform. He looked older than his good shoes. He said, "You could have buried me." I said, "Dad didn't write our grandmother's recipe on an order pad so his sons could ruin each other. Sign it, Vince." He signed. Marta's is still open. It is still 12 tables on the corner of 3rd and Vine. The bread still gets mixed by hand at 4 in the morning by me because I never did find anyone I trusted to do it, and honestly I don't want to. My grandmother's meatballs are exactly what they have always been because they are registered in my name in a tackle box in my attic, in a law office above a bakery, and in my 2 hands, and no chain and no brother in good shoes is ever going to change one thing about them. Vince and I are not close now. We are civil at the holidays. He tells people still that his family is in the restaurant business. And I let him because it costs me nothing and because on my better days I understand that a man who never learned to sit still is carrying his own kind of hunger, one my kitchen can't fix. Maybe we mend it someday. Forgiveness, I've found, cooks slow like Sunday gravy. You cannot rush it without ruining it, and you cannot tell from the smell alone whether it is going to come out right. But some nights, when the last table has gone and the room is warm and full of the ghost of garlic, I turn off the front lights and I look at my mother's name on the window, in the logo she drew on a napkin in 1983, and I think about my father in that wheelchair, tired, half of him already gone, doing the one quiet, careful thing that would keep all of this exactly what it was meant to be. The building is just a building. Anybody can buy a building. But the fire goes to the one who keeps it. He knew that 11 years out. He knew which son to trust with the flame. I'm still keeping it, Dad. For in the morning, every morning, the name is safe. The fire is safe. I never let it go out. And that's the end of this one. If it kept you up, do me one favor, hit subscribe. I tell a new story every single night, and I'd love to have you back. Good night.